Hey there, welcome to the Tech Tuesdays webinar on streaming CDC through Kafka to data engineering streaming. I am Vrinda Anil and I'll be hosting today's webinar. This webinar will help users who will need captured change data in real time and process it through Spark streaming to take advantage of Informatica's data engineering transformations and Spark functionality. Today's webinar will be presented by Bert Peters, who has been an instructor with Informatica University for over 20 years. He delivers training and has developed curriculum across multiple Informatica products, including Power Center, Power Exchange, Data Quality, and Data Engineering. Before we start off, here are some housekeeping tips. The webinar is for 1 hour. That includes a 45 minutes webcast. Then we'll move over to the Q&A section for answering your questions for 15 minutes. All dial-in participants will be muted so that the presenter will be able to present without any kind of disruptions. Your questions can be submitted through the Q&A section, and we will be addressing them to the end of the presentation. The webinar will be recorded and will be available to the Informatica support YouTube channel and the success portal. The link will be emailed to you as well. Please set aside some time to complete the post-webinar survey and provide your feedback and suggestions for upcoming topics for the Tech Tuesdays webinars. The Tech Tuesdays webinar is a webinar series introduced within the success portal. The Informatica Success Portal is a micro-learning platform that offers free and unlimited learning to all registered users. The Success Portal lists your success offerings, your customer success manager information, bookings available in the Ask an Expert session, and customized recommendation and content. Over to you, Bert. Thank you.
This presentation, I'm going to talk about how to link Power Exchange change data capture with data engineering streaming, formerly known as BDS or Big Data Streaming. In this presentation, we will cover the Power Exchange publisher and data engineering streaming architecture, the CDC, that is the change data capture registration of a source table, condensed logging, which is the capturing of database logging, using Test Data Manager to simulate data entry, starting the Power Exchange publisher, seeing how the data is captured through a Kafka topic, then creating a Kafka connection in DES, creating a Kafka data object in DES, and finally creating a DES mapping with a Kafka source and a Hive target so that we can see the complete process of the change data capture going through Kafka into the DES mapping to be processed by Spark streaming. The idea is we have a source database that's constantly changing. People are entering data, customers, employees, contractors, and we need to capture those changes as they're occurring. As those changes occur, the database automatically writes the information into the database logs, and that's where Informatica comes in. Informatica's real-time logger can read from the database logs and write that information into a set of what are called condensed files. The configuration for the real-time logger is based on what's called a capture registration that's provided by the Power Exchange listener. The capture registration is initially configured on the Power Exchange client tool, also known as the Power Exchange Navigator. And then the listener will copy that to the machine where the real-time logger is running. Once the logger has provided the data in condensed files, We then have the real-time publisher, which is also a component of Power Exchange, that reads from the condensed files and can provide that data to message queues. So here we have the real-time publisher, and it provides the change data to a message queue, which can then be read by Spark Streaming. Spark Streaming can be configured using a DES mapping that's developed in the Informatica developer tool. And then, of course, through Spark Streaming, we provide the data to wherever it needs to go so that the end users can work with it. We're going to start with a relational database table because that's what this use case is based upon. In this particular example, we'll be using Oracle. I'm going to simulate an airline reservation system. So I'll create a table called Booking. Create a column for data. The airport code for the booking destination. And of course, you can have other data columns as needed. So think about an airline reservation system. You've got the airline reservations agents, you've got travel agents, and you've got individuals over the internet, all entering reservations all day long, 24/7. And we want to be able to capture that information and analyze it. In this particular example, we're going to analyze bookings to particular destinations. Now that I've created the table, I need to register that table with Power Exchange. So I'm going to open the Power Exchange Navigator. Under Data Capture, I'm going to create what's called a registration group. And this will be called Booking. The location refers to where the Power Exchange listener is running. Ultimately, this capture registration that we're creating, that represents the metadata for our change data capture. That needs to be copied to the server where the listener is running. And that's going to happen automatically, but we need to specify the correct location of the listener. These locations are configured in a file called dbmover.cfg. So I'll choose InfoServer. And the type of data that I'm capturing is Oracle. And I need to enter an Oracle user ID and password. And what's called a collection identifier. This also corresponds to an entry in the dbmover.cfg file. So right here, I'll enter Aura cap BL. And if you're interested in more details on this topic, I recommend our Power Exchange class. Next. Then my capture registration will be called Booking. And the database schema will be SDBU. And I'm going to leave the table blank for now. Next. And now it gives me a list of tables available at that schema. So I'm going to double click booking. And then on the right, we get a list of columns. Next. And I'll set the capture registration to active. And at this point, we need to create what's called supplemental logging. This is an Oracle feature that provides the necessary logging information for change data capture. So the DDL that we're about to execute is going to create the supplemental logging for the booking table. And I'll click Finish. We're prompted to save a copy of that DDL code in case we need to recreate the supplemental log in the future. Save that. And we've executed the DDL. There's the syntax. Alter table booking, add supplemental log group. And now we have our registration group. And along with that registration group, we've automatically created what's called an extraction group. So let's go to Resources and double-click the Booking Extraction group. And then the specific one we want is Booking. There's the data. And if I right-click and show auto-generated columns, we see additional information that we're capturing from the logs. These first two fields have to do with restartability. They point to a particular location in the Oracle logs. So if we had to go back and start reading from that location in the Oracle logs, we would have the pointers to that location. Then we have the Oracle Unit of Work identifier, and then the name of the Oracle user who's making the change in the data that we're capturing. The timestamp of the data change. The action is going to be an insert, update, or delete. Then there's the Oracle row ID, and then down here we have the actual data. Let's go back to the slide for a moment. We've just created what's called the capture registration. And now the listener is going to provide this to the real-time logger. So what we need to do is start this real-time logger running so that it can read from the logs so that whenever we make changes to the data, we can capture it. So it's going to start reading from the logs, and it's also going to read that capture registration. Let's go to the server machine. Here's the Power Exchange directory on the server machine. Let's start the logger running. Yes to confirm that it's a warm start. That means it automatically goes to where it last left off reading in the Oracle logs. And normally this process would be something running in the background. So now we'll minimize this. The next thing we want to do is provide some data so that we can verify that our change data capture is working. Now, since we don't have real people out there entering airline reservations, we need to simulate this process. Well, Informatica's product called Test Data Manager has a feature that does just that, called Test Data Generator. So let's go back to the client machine. And on the client machine, we'll open a web browser, go to Test Data Manager. I've already created several jobs in Test Data Manager to simulate bookings. I have one to simulate 2 bookings, one that generates 10 bookings, and one that generates 1,000 bookings. I'll choose the 10-row job and form an actions execute workflow. Schedule now and execute it. Monitor the progress. So let's see where we are. We've simulated the data entry using Test Data Manager into the database. The database is taking that data entry and automatically logging it. And our real-time logger is picking up those log entries and writing them to condensed files. Let's do a test to see if that part of the process is working. I'm going to go back to the Power Exchange Navigator, and I'm going to perform what's called a row test. A row test runs a SQL query against the condensed files to see if we've captured change data. So there is our SQL query. Click Go, and we expect to see 10 rows of data. And now we verified that the logger is working. Here's the user who performed each insert. And here we see the randomly generated airport codes. So we have now verified that the real-time logger is capturing the changes being entered upstream and writing those changes to the condensed files. Next, we'll add the real-time publisher that takes the data from the condensed files and publishes it to a message queue. Because of our time constraint, I don't want to spend too much time on configuration, but there's one property of the publisher that I'd like to show you. So let me go to the publisher directory. Configuration files are. And we're going to take a look at the publisher Avro configuration. So by default, the publisher outputs data in an Avro format. In fact, right here we see the formatter type is Avro. And right here I've set the formatter Avro encoding type, which defaults to binary. I've set it to JSON. We're going to be sending the data over to data engineering streaming in the form of JSON messages. Now let's start the publisher. Up a couple directories. And then the command is pwxcdc publisher.sh. And I'm going to do a restart equals from start from the beginning of our condensed logs. Now let's switch over to our Kafka server. That's the Kafka service. Right there is Zookeeper, which runs underneath Kafka. Then here we have a command prompt that we can use. There's a very convenient website that you might want to make note of when you're working with Kafka. In fact, I have it bookmarked here. It's called kafka.apache.org/quickstart. It explains how to download and quickly install Kafka, and then the commands for starting the server. First we start Zookeeper, and then we start Kafka. There's a command for creating a topic. Here's a command for listing topics. Copy that command. And then I'm going to paste it in here. However, instead of using localhost as the server, I'm going to use the IP address 10.0.0. So there are several topics that are listed, but I'd like to draw your attention to this one right here. That corresponds to the brand new table that we've registered on the Power Exchange side. So you see the publisher automatically created a topic that's going to provide the CDC, the change data capture, from that table. Now let's do a test to see if this works. Let's look at how to monitor a Kafka topic. In other words, act as a consumer for a Kafka topic. So there's the syntax, again, from this handy website that I introduced. But we need to make a couple of changes. First of all, our topic name is not test. It is booking_booking. And also our host name, instead of localhost, we want to use the IP address. And click enter. Now it's not going to show us anything yet until some data actually gets pushed through. So how do we push the data through? Well, again, we use Test Data Manager. So let me once again bring up the Windows client and the web browser for Test Data Manager, execute, And just for this test, I'm going to choose to generate 2 records. Workflow. And monitor the status. Now that's succeeded. Let's go over to our Kafka queue. And we see the 2 rows have come out. So let's see how far we've progressed. So we previously tested the real-time logger using the row test within the Power Exchange Navigator tool. And now we've started the publisher running. And the publisher has pushed that data to a message queue, in our case Kafka, and we've monitored that message queue and seen the data come out. So at this point, we're making the transition from Power Exchange to data engineering streaming. The idea is we're going to configure Spark streaming to pick up the data from the Kafka queue using a DES mapping created in the Informatica developer tool. Let's go back to Kafka. Stop monitoring the queue for a moment. I'm going to start the Kafka consumer again. But this time I'm going to redirect the output to a JSON file. I need to push a couple of rows through again. Data manager, execute, 2 rows, execute workflow. And monitor. And then we'll go back to the Kafka queue. Let's stop that. You see we processed a total of 2 messages. And we've captured them in a file. We need to use that JSON file in order to create a schema on the DES side so that we can read that data. So I'm going to log into a different Windows client here, one that's configured for DES, and I'm going to start the developer tool. And I'll log into the model repository service. And the first thing I'm going to do is define a Kafka data object. But before I do that, I need to define a Kafka connection. So under Window, Preferences, Informatica, Connections. Your messaging, Kafka. I'll click Add. And I'll name this Kafka Res, representing our reservation system. The Kafka broker list is the IP address and the port number where Kafka is running. So in our case, that's 10.0.0.10:9092. And we also need the IP address and the port number of Zookeeper. The IP address is also 10.0.0.10:, and Zookeeper's port number is 2181. This connection. Successful, and finish. Next, I'm going to create a project. And I'll call this booking. Inside the project, I'm going to define a Kafka data object. New data object. Use Kafka from the list. I'll call it Kafka booking. And for connection, I'll choose the Kafka res connection that I just created. And then I need to choose which topic I'm consuming. So I'll click Add. And under Kafka res, I'll choose Topics. And then right here, I'll choose my booking topic. Click OK. And finish. I also need to tell DES whether I'm going to be reading from this topic or writing to this topic. In this case, we're going to be reading from the topic. So I'm going to select Data Object Operations, New, and specify Topic Read operation, and I'll name it Read Kafka Booking. And for resources, I need to specify the topic, which again is booking. Click Finish. And do a save. Next, I'm going to configure column projection, because right now what we have is all of the data in a binary stream. But if you want to have a mapping that does ETL on the data, then you'd like to be able to get at the individual elements of that data. And this is the reason why just a few minutes ago I captured some of the JSON that's coming out of that Kafka queue. I'm going to copy that JSON file using WinCP. So I'm going to log in to the server that's hosting Kafka. And there's the Kafka booking JSON file that we just generated a few minutes ago. And I'm going to copy that down to the local downloads folder. And there it is. So now I have a local copy of that file. So I'll close WinCP. And I'm going to select the Kafka booking topic. And under Properties, I'm going to choose Column Projection. Enable column projection using a JSON schema. Add schema. And I'm going to browse to that file, kafkabooking.json, which represents an actual sample of data that Power Exchange pushed through Kafka. Click Open. Click OK. Save. Now, instead of a binary field, I've got a bunch of data fields. Let's take a look at them. CapEx action. That's I, U, or D, depending on whether the operation was an insert, a delete, or an update. CapEx restart 1 and 2, those are the pointers to the Informatica, those are the pointers to the Oracle log. That's the Oracle row ID. There's the timestamp. There's the Oracle unit of work. CapEx user is the Oracle user that performed that particular change data event. And then right here we have the actual data. Although from the JSON we defined it here as a struct, so we're going to need to flatten that because the actual data value is buried underneath that struct. So let's go ahead and close the data object and create our mapping. Right-click the project, New, Mapping. I'll call this M Booking Report. Finish. And then I'll bring my Kafka booking data object into the mapping with read access. And let me do a save. But because the JSON embedded our data into a complex hierarchy called a struct, we're going to need to flatten that in order to get at the actual data. So I'm going to right-click IATA 3 and select Hierarchical Conversions, Flatten Complex Port. Select IATA 3 and click Finish. And now if we look at this expression transformation, down here at the bottom, we have our data. Let's save that. What I'd like to do ultimately is keep a running total of how many bookings there are for each destination. So I'm going to right-click and add a transformation, and this will be an expression transformation. And I'm going to name it exp_count. And then I'm going to take my data string, IATA3 string, and feed it into that expression. I'll do a right-click, arrange all, make everything neat. Do a save. Then what I'm going to do is take this expression and configure windowing. So I'll select the expression and select windowing. And I'm going to partition on the value of the airport code. Choose, add a 3 string, click OK. So now all the rows with a given airport code are going to be on one partition. Then I'll go to ports. And I'm going to add a port called dest count var. And I'll make it an integer. And I'm going to make it a variable port. And then my expression will be dest count var plus 1. Remember that an integer variable is automatically initialized to 0. a save. A Control S is the hotkey for a save. And then I'm going to add an output called dest count. That will be an integer. And I'll uncheck input to make it an output port. And its expression will be dest count var. Validate that. Click OK and save. Then I'm going to add one more port and call this time point. Make it a date time. And I'll make that an output. And then for the expression here, I'm going to go under date. And I'm going to choose sys timestamp. Move that. Validate that. So that's going to give me the current date and time. Will be attached to that record. So that at a given point in time, I'm going to know how many bookings I've had for each destination. To make this a little more user-friendly, however, I'd like to not just have the airport codes, but the actual cities and states. So I have a lookup file for that. Here's airport codes. And this one right here matches each airport code with a city and state. So in Developer, I'm going to create a data object of type flat file. Browse to see InfoShared lookup files. Choose all files and select airport codes. Click Next. There's the IATA code and the corresponding city and state. It's a comma delimited file. Doesn't have quotes. And I'm going to import column names from the first line. Next and finish. And then under Advanced, I'll go to the Read properties, and I need to specify the name and the location of the file on the server. Home, the user, info, shared. Lookup files. And then I'll save that. So now I know where to find it on the server. Close that tab. And I'll select airport codes and drag it into my mapping as a lookup. Let me do a little rearranging here. And I'm going to select IATA 3 dest count and time point from my expression. and drag those over as inputs to the lookup. Let me right-click and do an arrange all. Do a save. And then I'll select the lookup. And under properties, I'll select lookup and add my lookup condition, which will be based on IATA 3. So now I have a city and a state. Next, I'm going to add another expression transformation. And this is going to be used just to specify my outputs to make it easier to generate a target. So for my outputs, I want the IATA code and the corresponding city, state, and I'd also like destination count and time point. And I'll name this EXP output. Do a save. And then from here, I'll generate my target, which is going to be a Hive table. So right-click, create target, relational, connection type, Hive, name, booking report. And I'll do a save. I'll select the right object, and under properties runtime, I need to specify a Hive connection. And under advanced, oh, actually one more thing under runtime. DES, when you have a Hive target, DES requires that you specify an owner name. And if there's no explicit owner name, you can use the database name as the owner name. In this case, the database name is default. Then I'll click Advanced. And right here, I've specified that we're going to create or replace table at runtime, because the table does not already exist. Next, I need to configure this mapping for Spark. And when you have a Spark configured mapping that has a Kafka source, that automatically invokes Spark streaming. So let me go to the mapping runtime properties and choose Spark and unselect native, and then specify a Hadoop connection. Do a save, and then I'll right-click and do a validate. I need to select this data object, and at the data object level, I also need to specify a connection and an owner. And again, I'll specify default as the owner and do a save. Progress window. So now let's run the mapping. Run it in the background. And since it's a real-time mapping with a message queue as a source, it's going to run continuously until it's explicitly canceled. While that's running, we need to push some more data through. So let me go back to our other client. There's TDM. And this time I'm going to select the job that generates 1,000 bookings and execute that workflow. And monitor its progress. Now that that's succeeded, let's go check the target. So here's our booking report target. We'll select the data viewer and run it. And here we see the results. So you'll notice for each record that has the same airport code, we increment our counter, and we also have the current point in time. So if you want to know how many bookings to each destination occurred within a certain time period, you can query this table and filter on time point. Or you can get the maximum time point for each destination. Right, there's 31 for Boston, and there's 29 and 30 for Miami. Actually, Miami's actually in the 40s. So you could get the maximum count. Miami's much larger, actually. Miami's up to 67. So you can get the maximum dest count for a given destination. You can apply city or maybe even group by state and do your analysis on how many people are traveling to each destination. That concludes this presentation on how to generate test data, pass it through Power Exchange change data capture, through a Kafka message queue to data engineering streaming, formerly known as big data streaming, and be able to run that data through a DES mapping. Questions?
Hello everyone, we are open for questions live. Please post your questions in the Q&A box and we'll answer them. So we have this one question from Aiden, but goes like this. What's the difference between Power Exchange for Casca and Power Exchange for CDC Publisher? Are they both part of the same product group or licensed separately? Also, does this work with the Confluent platform?
Yeah, I think we answered that one in the chat.
Right, we answered it.
Yeah, Power Exchange CDC Publisher sends data from Power Exchange CDC to Kafka. Power Exchange for Kafka allows you to read or write non-CDC data to or from Kafka. These products are licensed separately. Confluent is essentially Kafka. So yes, we do interface with it from both CDC Publisher and Power Exchange for Kafka.
Okay. Please post your questions in the Q&A box. Looks like we have answered this question already, Bert. Can we? Yeah, we have one question. Do we need both CDC and Power Exchange to parse data from Kafka and Informatica?
Do we need both CDC and Power Exchange? Not necessarily. So CDC is used to capture changes from relational sources. However, data engineering streaming, formerly known as big data streaming, can read from Kafka sources, and the data going into those Kafka topics could be coming from anywhere.
Okay. We have one more question. Are many customers using Power Exchange CDC Publisher?
Andy or Mark, do you know the answer to that?
Well, the answer is yes. The product's been out for, I want to say, three or 4 years. And yes, we do have a number of customers that are using it. And I actually am working 2 active trials at this moment too. So it's a fairly active product.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. Another question. With regards to creating the mapping, is DES required or can IICS be used?
Okay, we may have to follow up on that one because I'm not a cloud expert, so I'm going to have to research that one. Unless Andy or Mark, you know the answer to that one. IICS is Informatica Cloud Services.
Right, right. It would require a Kafka connector for IICS, and I'm not sure what the status is on that. It would require a cloud expert.
Yeah, so let's defer this question. Let's capture this one and follow up in an email.
Okay.
Sure, Bert. You can do that. We have like 3 more minutes to answer your questions. Please post your questions in the Q&A box. So this session is being recorded and will be available in the Informatica Support YouTube channel and the Success portal. The recording will be emailed to you as well. You will also be able to download the slide deck. Yes, we have 2 more questions. First one goes this way. Where will this demo be available for later viewing? It will be available in the Informatica Success portal, also in the YouTube channel. Another question. What is Power Exchange for CDC Publisher a separate install from Power Exchange for CDC?
Yes, there is an additional installation required, yes.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Another question. Are there more demos of using this available on network.informatica.com?
I haven't come across any. Mark or Andy, are you aware of any?
I did one for a publisher, I want to say about a year and a half ago. As I remember, it was available on Informatica on our website. I'd have to go back and look for it though.
Okay, we'll get back to you on that, Aidan. Looks like we have answered most of the questions and we have none coming up now. So if ever we have failed to answer any of your questions, we'll get back to you after this presentation. Thank you for joining this call. Hope everyone is safe at different point. Thank you. Thanks, Bert, for joining this call.
You're welcome.
Thank you.